Great name. Everyone calls me Abby, just the 4 first letters. That's my GitHub. That's my LinkedIn. What do I do? Don't hold this against me, but I did start with Java. Although technically that's not true. I did start with C. So Java was just a step in the middle. But for the last 15-ish years, 10 to 15-ish years, I've been programming in Python and Ruby. And I suppose I love Ruby. That's why I'm here. I wouldn't be anywhere else. All right. So the problem, and is it really a problem? We all know Ruby is threaded. Everything that you work with and around Ruby is threaded. Whether it's your app server, whether it's your gem, whether it's just a net HTTP simple net call that you make. But often, when you work with shared programs which have threads and multi-thread system, we need to. That is also very threaded. Yep.
That was another thread.
Yep. Okay, we're off to a good start. Sorry, everyone on Zoom. Although actually that doesn't. Nope. Cool. Working? Cool. All right. For example, you may have user settings, or when someone's requesting a web page, you want to localize it, customize it. Or in my case, about 10 years ago, the worst mistake I ever made was to manage my own synchronization in a process to manage sort of an exchange. So I have an example, which is not a shameful plug, but rather a shameful plug, that I actually made this mistake, and I'm not making that mistake. There were 2 reasons behind it, and I'll talk about it, hopefully. All right. So let's start with some examples, bad examples. File splitting. You may get a bunch of files that you want to process. You have a service object that you get uploaded files. You want to split into different files and then upload it to S3. This is being taken from that website. And basically what it's doing class level methods because you don't want to instantiate an instance of a file that you just want to keep everything as memory optimized as you want. And it's just splitting those lines, saving it in class level variable. It looks all right, but it's Ruby, it's threaded. It's never all right. Effectively, you overwrite someone else's file. How exciting is that? Or paginated indexing. I'm not sure why you would do this, but just for the sake of example, this bad example is there, and I'm actually going to run this example. In most cases, it won't be an issue. Ruby is pretty good, but with multi-thread systems, if there's a context switch, you don't know what's going to happen. So any input-output blocking call is a context switch, and this is just forcing that context switch. So effectively, what will happen, it will throw an error because someone else may override it. Maybe I'm jumping ahead a bit. This was me. So this is a very bad code, very bad example of code. This is not verbatim my actual code. It's a very condensed down version of a code to the point, if I was to hire myself based on this code, I would not hire myself. Probably. Going back, I should have just used Redis and Sidekick and Rescue, but I didn't. I wrote my own sort of, I think, initializer, which was managing a separate process and a thread, which would combine all the incoming orders. So the idea was, I think I can talk about the idea, although it was a bit proprietary. You would get multiple orders and you want to reason on all these incoming orders simultaneously. So if there are 5 requests, if it's in process, they matter together, not individually. And if something is new, something else comes in, it has to be sent to the pending queue. And that's what I did. And this is not a great example for various reasons. Possibly CurrentAttributes may help. I don't have a solution for that. And yes, somewhere in your actual action, you say, okay, if the order has been persisted, check what your queue is like. If the queue is pending because you're still running an external process, Sorry, yes, I was running an external operating system level process as well, which was managing incoming requests in Ruby. This was a research project in financial markets. So we had to do something as fast as we could. Timeline was concise. So yeah, this is a bad example because it's using, can anyone tell me what it's using?
Sorry.
Class variables. How exciting are they?
Yes.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's called bulk. Let's the slides look great. Well, then you may ask, well, hang on, have you heard of mulexes? Well, of course I have. I used it. It was horrible. It was pain, and there was a bug that I still haven't fixed. Luckily, we gave this MVP to the industry partner who didn't want to use Ruby. They more want to use Java. That's more common in financial markets. But yes, I have heard of it. So have others. But it's not necessarily always great. There are gotchas. I had. How about rack lock? This is actually pretty good, isn't it? Has anyone heard of this middleware? No. It does this. Pretty much it does this. It has anyone written a middleware? I suppose you have, most of you. Yep. So you just, what it's doing, it's wrapping the app call with a mutex synchronize. And yeah, just in your configuration, you load it like that. So I'm going to show you if this machine allows me to switch. Okay. Right. It's about the whole rack lock thing. Let's minimize this. So my server is running. I have a Postgres database running, just a sample Rails 8 application with a bunch of other stuff that shouldn't be there. So what I'm going to show you first is the whole example of if this class variable is present and if it's set to that, and we'll just do a quick A/B test, Apache benchmark, which, this is slow. All right, so I'll just run three separate to simulate three threads that I have running in Puma. And it will become apparent why, even though you have sleep and whatnot, not to have certain thread level variables. Oof. Oh, yes, please. Yep. It just got big. That was Ruby magic. Yep. Total of one request completed. My computer is definitely struggling. Albeit this is 6 years old, 7 years old computer. Okay, so that didn't complete. What I wanted to show you was the failures, and it does result in failures. You could use rack lock, and effectively what it's doing, it's locking the entire request in a single mutex. Oh, it's still running. Cool. Wonderful. It is slow. So what's happening with sleep is context switching. If you use class variables, it gets overwritten because two things are happening. One, Puma shares its thread across requests. So if you have 5 worker threads, they all share across multiple requests. So this gets overwritten. If I use rack lock, I would like to show you, but my computer is not cooperating with me today. Effectively, what will happen, the entire request runs as a single block of requests. This is 0.1 second delay, but imagine if you were doing a database query or you were doing an S3 upload or anything of that sort, this will have a major impact. So we can't really use rack lock, but we still want to share stuff around. Let's go back to this.
What the background just to handle applications that have not read.
Pretty much. And to be honest, I don't think we should use it because unless you have heaps and heaps of resources, you just keep on spawning your Heroku dynos or heaps of Docker containers, it's not scalable. It's effectively going against the core of Ruby, which is multi-threaded systems. That and Puma relies upon being multi-threaded, so it can handle all those extra requests. Anything better? Well, that's why we're here. Thread local variables. So instead of having global variables, you say, okay, let's keep a variable that's just local to the thread, and this becomes important. It becomes important. Okay. Thank you. Finally. Oh, okay. It became really important. So instead of having global variables, Ruby has threads and fibers and now rectors. What you do, you use thread.current, give it a value, and just store it within. So it stays localized to a given thread. If you execute this program, if there's a new thread as a child from your parent thread, it gets its own nil value and you initialize it. So I like it. I put it into production. Thread.current, current user is user, and whatever locale I want to use. This is fine. That's the end of the story. Is it? No, not really. And why is that? Because threads can be reused. Puma and not Passengers does have threaded version for paid app. But this is Puma. So threads can be reused. So if I use thread local variable, looks fine. You can have 3 requests. And if you sleep, it won't have an effect. But once your request is over and Puma receives a new batch of requests, those values are still in that thread. Threads are getting recycled. Then clear the state. It's actually very simple. Set it to nil. So write an application controller before and after action. Just clear the thread state. Sounds good, but now I have to manage this. And it doesn't really fit nicely with the business logic, with the application, why application controller needs to maintain a certain sort of state. You could do it in model possibly, but again, it doesn't belong there. Now, I think at this stage, I have an example. If I can run that example. Oh, sorry, no example, sorry. Yep, every control now works. You clear the state, not unless you have a very fibrous appetite. By this, I mean, if you're using an application that relies heavily upon fibers, not just threads. Fibers are even lower level than threads. They don't have an exact match between operating system threads, or rather they do. I'm not going to go into that. But Falcon is the new app server, which is fiber-based. There are async libraries, which are fiber-based, async in particular. And if you do that, they don't actually work nicely. Simran, how are we doing with time? Good. All right.
Your laptop's too quick this time.
This is actually an intro. You can tell, right?
Can you just speak a little louder?
Yep. Cool. Oh boy, this is so exciting.
Something saying. So something saying 100% on top line is that your CPU. It would be because the Intel Max
Did you see 100%? Yep. So the funny thing is, I can't even use my mouse. All right, let's just go to the next one. Hopefully this.
What's happening, everyone?
Did you end up using too much threads?
I do have a few things running. It's actually on my computer.
Yeah.
Oh, on a different computer.
Yeah,
Yep, can do. I'm stuck.
I heard someone's complaining about Zoom at the back. Oh,
Oh, there was my mouse. Although I also need my room mine, so that might not work. Yeah, that's fine. I'm just going to skip full view.
only when you can get this back.
All right, I will do away with all right, so can we do better? Well, the better option, arguably better option, is active support current attributes. Instead of maintaining global state yourself, you let Rails do the global state. But I will talk about this a bit more in detail towards the end, where not everyone likes it. So I would say take it with a grain of salt. And there are two people who are not here, but they're usually quite present in these meetings, who have had this issue in the past. So what exactly does current attributes do? It does something similar to thread.current and stores states in a thread level storage, but it does more than that. One of the things it does, it hooks into the Rails request cycle. So when the request comes in, it sets it up. You populate it in a controller. Once you're done, once the request is over, it resets the whole stack. So it uses callbacks. You can also use it outside of request cycle. So you can use it in a job, for example. And you can set various attributes as and when needed. What's more important is it uses isolated execution state. And what it does, it uses thread.current, but it does more than that. It has levels of isolation, whether it isolates per thread or per fiber, based on which it stores those attributes in that level of data storage. So let's do some inspections. Right. Oh, that is horrible. Yep. So in order to use current attributes, you define your own class, you subclass current attributes, and whichever attribute you want to store, username, locale, you just specify that. Zoom in. So it's really as bare bones as this. If you just want to access certain attributes, you specify that as an attribute. It sets up method missing, so sets up any methods that you want to call upon it, but it does more than that. It allows you to specify where you want to capture these attributes. It is effectively a global state. So I was going to show an example. Unfortunately, that won't run, would it? Nope. Actually, this. Yep. So before we look into this app context current attributes, yeah. So instead of storing class variables or global variables, you can use thread level data. So thread.current allows you to capture any attribute that you want to store, any variable. I'm just using app user. In the main fiber, which is fiber.current, I put print whatever I have saved, which is fine. If I open a new fiber, it does inherit some aspects of the parent thread, but not every. It doesn't save thread scope data, which I should be able to run. So all I'm doing is saving some attribute on the thread level and printing it on the thread and inside various fibers contained using async library. Okay. I promise you it worked on my computer. This is my computer. Unfortunately, for the sake of time, I may have to skip this, but if you can take my word for it, what will happen is it will only print the first thread.current. Everything inside the fiber calls to fiber and async. Because async uses fiber, it won't get printed. And the only way to do it is to change the isolation level. But let's go back into current attributes, what it actually does. So the very base level, it so it defines some of its own attributes that you cannot use. So some Ruby names, set, reset. Set allows you to set an attribute outside of a request cycle. And it also allows you to use it in a with block. So if you have an attribute, for example, app, I think you had this example in one of your talks. If you set some app context dot user equals to user A, but you want to test with a different user while you're processing some request, so effectively temporarily override the context that you've set, CurrentAttributes.set allows you to use that. It allows you to use a temporarily set value for the attribute within a block, use it. It clears once the block exits, it resets that value to the old value. That's what set is doing. And then that, what's more important, it creates its own singleton instance. So this is still a class level, as you can see, it's opening an eigen class. And the way it's managing all the data, all the attributes, is still a global state. So current instance, which is an isolated execution state. Isolated execution state says, given a thread or a fiber, which is thread.current, or fiber.current, which allows you to store any value that you want. Default is thread. It gets that as a singleton and adds any other attributes that you've defined in that isolation level. So whether it's thread.current or fiber.current. So that's that, which is its own instance key, which is name of your class. So if you have multiple contexts that you want to track, here I had app context. You may have another class with subclasses, current attributes, if you want to track a different set of data. It keeps track of these isolated states based on the name of the class that you've defined, and use that as a key. And everything else for accessing those attributes gets offloaded to method missing. It basically delegates those methods to the instance itself. You can specify defaults. This was set. One that I'm looking for is, there it was. Reset. It uses active supports inbuilt callback mechanism. So the callbacks we have used in models, controllers, it uses the same thing. It registers a callback for reset. Every time you do, Rails does a reset of its request cycle, or in console when you call reload. These trigger a reset callback, which what current attributes does is basically clears the entire state of your context. In terms of isolation, it's just doing this. By default, it's using thread, or you can, or you can specify a scope, which will be a fiber, but I think it's further down at the bottom. So by default, use a thread level isolation. All it's doing, takes a symbol and then it's up there. There you go. Depending on what you've set, it uses the thread class or the fiber class, uses the current data store at that isolation level and captures everything inside it. So it is doing what I sort of showed earlier in the slides. I can just use thread.current and capture any thread local variable, but it's doing more than that. I had to clear the state. I had to make sure that if there was a context switch, that data didn't get overwritten. Rails is doing that for me. Unfortunately, it is still a global state. There's one more gotcha, which I think I have in my slides. Isolation level. You can do thread level isolation or fiber level isolation. For most purposes, if you're using Puma as a server, this will work. Whether you use fiber isolation or thread isolation, it will work. Unfortunately, this won't work in Falcon. Despite Falcon, so Falcon is fiber-based app server. Puma is thread-based app server. With fiber level isolation, because now you're using fiber, you have to think about the subfibers. So with this isolation, the subfibers don't have access to that data across fibers. So one of the examples I had, which unfortunately I can't run it now, the lines won't get printed even if I had fiber isolation with async, because they cannot see that. The solution, or the proposed solution to this, is, I think, Ruby 3 point something brought along was fiber storage. So it's basically fiber with square brackets, and you store the data that you want, which is not fiber current. Caveat says, and should you use current attributes? It really depends upon your taste. It does help in keeping a context. So for example, a request comes in, you want to use users locale, or one of the places where I was going to use, but I haven't used now, I thought I could use, was to keep track of who is making a change. So I want to know who's the current user and the user who is getting modified. Does the user who is making this modification have access to business logic to modify the current user, and also do an event log? So you can use an event logging. However, this is still a global state. This is still a global variable. It does have gotchas, and it does introduce a lot of magic, because where does the actual attribute get set? If you are setting your attribute in multiple places, then magic becomes black magic. The application may break, because it's like global variable. If you access your global variable in multiple places, if you're not careful where you're setting that global variable, things break. And do not pass across jobs. So pass an ID, which is what we do. And some sources. And two things that I was going to mention, there are two people who are important. One person who doesn't like current attributes is Ryan Big. He actually made a post about it. If I can bring that up. Which would be that. So he did write a pretty good article back when this was introduced in 5.2, because that's what it's doing. It's thread local variable, but it's a global state. It's not exactly a local state. And the other person who is actually quite important, because he was the one who asked this question before you, Adam, is KJ. He asked this on GitHub about why current attributes don't work at fiber level isolation. So even though it may seem that fiber level isolation will work for threaded servers, it doesn't work for fiber-based servers, because it's the same thing. When you become a fiber-based server, then you have to go a level deeper to have that isolation and have certain attributes available from your parent fibers. So that's that over there. Oops. And now this is not quite Ruby statement. This is a Python statement, but Ryan also agrees with this. Sometimes explicit is better than implicit. So current attributes, it works, it's magical, but it's very implicit. If you are not careful with where you are setting your attributes, the application may still have issues because of the global nature of the global nature of current attributes. What you can do is something that Devise does. Is Devise provides a method current user instead of a current attribute-based approach. So it does memoization, and you just call current user, you get the current user in whichever context you need it. Ryan also talks about that in his article, that it may work in some cases, but if you want to have less error in your tests and outside of request cycles, you are generally better off just not using current attributes. And that's all. Thank you. And sorry for the. Yep. I did try. I think Adam has tried in the wide. I have used current attributes not in the bad example I gave, but yeah, that was a very bad example. The place where I used was I was trying to track event logging context that let's say a user sends an order, what happened to the order at different stages. And the second place where I sort of used, but I just gave up on that idea because I just went my own way, was to log, let's say if there's a member in an organization makes a change to another member's authorization level, I was tracking, okay, who is sending this request? And at various points, if they're running, whether a service object got run or a background job got run or just another controller action in that whole request chain, whether it was asynchronous or synchronous, was to keep track of who started this request for which user. And along that path, while I was logging my events or running a background job, I used this, but I was mostly passing along IDs instead of full object. And I was also trying to isolate to pass this within a certain block. So only within a request cycle, I would use it. Job will have its own context to track that sort of information. Yeah, but like I said, I'm not a big fan of this either. Take it with a grain of salt. Use it where you can. But if I make a mistake, because it's a global state, and if I accidentally override the data elsewhere that I should not have, I'm in trouble.
What is the difference between this attributes versus attribute access?
Attribute accesses, they are instance variables. So it's just a syntactic sugar. Oh, so adder accesses that you might have seen in your model classes or elsewhere, it's just a syntactic sugar on top of instance variables. Whereas this is effectively a global state, where imagine trying to pass, and I think some of us have done in the past, you have some data in your controller, you want to save your model, and you want to pass along certain information to the model. Off the top of my head, request information. So request IP or request environment. You could, in theory, use current attributes for that, because request as an object is not available inside the model itself. And this is where what I don't like about it is the cohesion and coupling that it has. It's more risk prone as far as I see it.
Let's say you are a user model, right? And in that model, you are saying some option based on that you have logic in the model. Forgive me, shouldn't be logic in the model, but let's say you have it.
Yep.
So would you recommend using in that case, you are saying some variable and say based on that variable, you are like this and that?
So the problem I have with this is right off the top of my head, if I was doing something in console and want to interact directly with the model, where is the app context getting set? Where are the current attributes getting set? It's not coming from controller, which means now I have to set it myself to simulate it. If I was running tests don't have access, then you have to save somewhere in the test itself. So it is a bit fragile when you want to pass such information to the model. But if all you really care about is requests, the whole request cycle, something comes in, I don't see why you cannot use it as long as you're careful. Yeah.
Any more questions? Yeah, we got that structured question. So hypothetically speaking, you want to build a gem that manages 10 million people, and you need somewhere to store that 10 scope into that request. How are you going to do it if you don't want to do it that way?
The easiest option was on the screen. I don't have so I know the question you're asking, and I know why you're asking. I was actually, it's hypothetical. I was hypothetically thinking about that question over the last month.
Yeah.
Not just in the context of the question of gem, but also in the context of using that within a console and how to prevent that information getting cleared when you reload a console. In Rails, there are post initialization methods, hooks that you could call, and in theory use those to preserve the data, but I haven't experimented with that yet. So off the top of my head, yes, you can use this. And I think there are certain gems which do use current attributes. I think Solid Key uses it. I'll have to check that. I did see that mentioned somewhere. Yep. So some gems do use it. Can't recall off the top of my head. I don't have a concrete answer, but a stopgap answer is to use current attributes. Yep. Yes, please.
Honestly, cross wires here, but have you looked at dry effects? Has anyone else looked at dry effects? And is that playing a similar sound, solving, could you solve some of these problems with itself?
So I haven't looked into it, but it's funny because I did see that in passing in one of the articles I was reading about this topic. That's why I was also telling about some gems which use current attributes. Don't have an answer on that, but I have seen it, and now you have intrigued me more. So I'm
Next
going to
meetup.
next meetup next month, right? I know you're going to do that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.